Hey guys, there I was just blowing with a cool scale called the altered scale. That's a really hip scale. It's based on the melodic minor modes. Some of you may already know it, but by the end of today, I promise you're going to know how all this stuff works, because today we're going to go through all the scales that you ever need to know for jazz improvisation. And believe it or not, there aren't that many. I've boiled it down to 18 here. And if you want to check it out, we're going to have a PDF of all of the scales from a common root. That's a really important way to practice. So it's going to be like a master index for you, where you're going to have all the 18 scales from C, then all the 18 scales from D flat, through all the keys, and we're going to have 4 exercises that I consider to be like the most important scale exercises. We're going to have those 4 exercises worked on every single scale in all 12 keys. So it's going to be a pretty incredible resource to check out. Make sure to check that out in the link below. So as a lot of you guys know, I'm not teaching anymore. I'm just touring too much these days, and I'll do master classes when I'm on the road. Today I'm actually heading to Egypt, heading to JFK in a second here for a flight with my quartet to Egypt, and got shows coming up everywhere from Portland to Italy and everywhere in between. So just make sure to check out the show dates on my website to stay posted. It's always really fun when I get to meet somebody on the road from the internet. But anyway, there actually will be one opportunity to study with me this summer outside of San Francisco Conservatory, and that's actually at the Orlando Jazz Workshop, where I'll actually be teaching. That's a great summer program put on by Ryan Devlin, who's actually a former student of mine and an awesome tenor player. And the faculty is going to be great. Dick Oates is going to be on faculty, Terrell Stafford, both of them from the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, of course, and well-known soloists in their own right. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure to check out that program, and there's going to be a link in the description below. All right, so let's jump right in. I've boiled it down to 18 scales, as I said earlier. The first 6 are going to be the most common scales that you're going to want to use and that you're going to hear. And they're going to be over 5 very common chords. So first one, I'm sure most of you will recognize this. We've got the major scale over major 7 chord. Then we're going to do dominant scale over a dominant 7 chord. People also refer to this as mixolydian. Quick spiel on modes. I actually recommend that it's great to understand modes, but I wouldn't think in terms of modes. Then you're always thinking to a different area. For instance, with mixolydian, you would be thinking, okay, that's the 5, so then I've got to go down to the major scale. It's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's too much of an equation to figure out when you're blowing. You want to just know scales on their own. And so the best way to practice that is honestly to understand them from a common root. So that's one of the reasons why we structured the PDF like that. So the PDF has all the scales you ever need to know from C, all from D flat, all from D, etc. So again, that's the dominant scale for a dominant 7. Then we're going to do Dorian. This is going to be minor scale for a minor 7. Now Dorian's going to be the most common minor scale that we use. There are going to be a couple options, other options, alternatives that we do later, but that's just kind of the most common stock option for a minor 7 chord is going to be the minor scale, which is Dorian for jazz. You know, in classical sometimes they use Aeolian. But anyway, moving on. Those are the 3 most common by far. Then we've got some that I find people don't know as well, and they're really important. So the next one's going to be what you use on a half diminished chord. Now we're going to have 2 options with that. You could either do the flat 9 with a half diminished chord or the natural 9. So again, we've got is 1 minor 3, flat 5, dominant 7, and then we can either have the flat 9 or the natural 9. So first what we're going to do is a scale that pairs with the flat 9. And this, by the way, is probably the only chord in jazz theory where you've got a couple different options. Some people say to do one, some people say to do the other. A lot of people, like me, say both are great. Just depends on what flavor you want to get. So for the flat 9, what you're going to do is Locrian. Or for the natural 9, you're going to do, it's called Locrian and natural 2. Same exact scale, you just raise the second note. Again, for the sheet music on all this stuff, just check out the link in the description below. Then, for our 6th scale, that's going to break down, it's going to conclude all the most common scales of the 18, although the remaining 12 are also really killing. So for the 6th scale here, we're going to do a diminished scale. We're going to do the whole half diminished scale because the other common chord that we have to have nailed that happens all the time in jazz standards is a diminished chord. For instance, you'll have diminished chords that go up into 3, 6, 2, 5s all the time. So it's really important to get that sound. So for the diminished chord, a lot of people don't know that if you go beyond just the 1, flat 3, flat 5, and 6, which some people would call it double flat 7, if you go beyond that, you can really fill it in with a major 7. It's a nice sound, and a 9. So that's going to sound like, I also put a 6 in there. Actually, sorry, the 6 is part of it. So we've got 1, 6, flat 3, flat 5, major 7, and 9. Really nice sound. Now, if we do a scale that goes with that, what we're going to have is the whole half diminished scale. The whole half diminished scale. Yeah, so we've got whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, and we're done. So as you can see, the half diminished chord has very little to do with any diminished scale. It has nothing to do with it, actually. And now we're actually getting into a real diminished scale with a diminished chord. So this is the diminished 7, and what we use is the whole half diminished scale. Okay, now we're going to go on to variations of major scales. So before we just had the regular major scale, now we're going to do a sharp 11 on the chord. So we're going to have a major 7 sharp 11, and the scale that we're going to do with that is going to be Lydian. But again, we don't want to think, oh, let's see, C, Lydian, so we've got to go to, what major is it? G's, okay. Cool, we've got to go to G major. Okay, great. We don't want to do that whole equation. We just want to know Lydian on its own. So again, go to the scales package that we've now got on the website to check that out. So Lydian is going to be for major 7 sharp 11. Then if you see a major 7 sharp 5, that also has a sharp 11 implied, even though it's just called major 7 sharp 5. But we're also going to raise the 5. So then we end up getting this. So that scale is a mode of melodic minor, but again, you just want to learn it on its own. It's called Lydian augmented. All right, so a quick note now before we go on to the dominant scales, because probably a lot of you at this point are thinking like, okay, wow, so cool to start learning these new scales that I didn't know, but how do I use them? Great question. And the most important thing to do is you need to start being flexible with different shapes and different exercises on these scales. So that's what's going to get it to the point where you become flexible and you can really solo around it and use different shapes of the scale in your playing. So again, we've got those 4 exercises that I really consider to be the most important scale exercises, and we've applied them to all 18 scales in all 12 keys. So just make sure to check out that PDF on the website. All right, so now we're going to move on to some other dominant scales that we can do, and so we're going to also talk about some other dominant chords naturally that they pair with. So we're going to start with the flat 9 chord, and the first 4 scales that we talk about here are going to be scales that we use on flat 9 or altered or chords that end up typically going, acting as a 5-1 in minor keys. That type of motion, 5-1 in a minor key. So we're first going to start with and I'm going to voice accordingly, the scale that most jazz theorists say pairs best with a flat 9 chord because it has a natural 6. That's the natural 6 note. So that's going to be the half whole diminished scale. Really nice sound. All right, so that's a great option, but the reality is a lot of times when pianists and guitarists see a flat 9 chord, they end up putting a flat 6 on it or a flat 13 because it sounds really nice, gives it a little more of a dark, mysterious vibe. And so one of the options that you can do for that is going to be our next scale, the 5th mode of harmonic minor, which is also called Phrygian dominant. The only scale that you need to learn that is a mode of the harmonic minor scale. And so that one is a really cool sound. Then we're going to do an altered chord and scale now. Now, that's going to sound like this. Now, for the altered scale, we've got everything, all the juicy stuff. We've got flat 9, we've got sharp 11, we've got flat 13. And so this one is also a really common sound, but there are a few different names for it. There's also, people call it the diminished whole tone scale because it starts off diminished and then it becomes a whole tone scale. Or some people call it super locrian. But I prefer to just call it the altered scale, and I think a lot of people are starting to do that more and more. Just for sake of uniformity, you've got the altered scale, which works on the altered chord. All right, now we're going to do one more of these kind of 5-1 minor type of motions. We're going to do, this one's called mixo flat 6. It's also a mode of melodic minor, the 5th mode. But again, I don't worry too much about the modal stuff. The way that you would voice this is actually going to be with a natural 9. So it sounds like this. Kind of has a mystical quality to it. That can also go as a 5-1 motion in minor, but it's a little less common because it has that natural 9. Okay, so now for 2 more options for dominant scale alternatives. We can also do what's called Lydian dominant, which is just going to be what you use on a dominant chord with a sharp 11. All you do is raise the 4 from a regular dominant chord, or dominant scale. So that's that. Then we could also do a sharp 5 chord. So that's going to be paired with the whole tone scale. The whole tone scale is really hip. It's a little tricky because it has fewer notes than what we're used to, or even 2 fewer notes if you're comparing to diminished scales. Most scales have 7 notes. Some diminished scales have 8 notes. This one only has 6, so unique notes. So it gets a little confusing when you're trying to use this one. Again, we've got the scale exercises if you're trying to get comfortable with the whole tone scale or any of these available in that PDF package that I mentioned. Quick note, this is another chord where some people voice it differently. Some people voice this with a sharp 11. Some people voice it with a regular 5 and a sharp 5. So then you take out the sharp 11, and then you can do that last scale that we just talked about, not the Lydian dominant, but right before that, that mixo flat 6 can also work on this chord depending on how it's voiced. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. We've only got 4 scales left. So for the next 2, we're going to do variations on minor. And there are really just a couple common ones. One is going to be melodic minor. Probably a lot of you know about that one. So with that, we've just got essentially the Dorian minor, but you raise that 7 back to a major 7. So it's also called the minor major 7 chord. So you could also think of it as a major scale, but you lower the 3rd, either way. So that's melodic minor. Then we've also got Aeolian. So that's going to sound like this. It's like Dorian, except you lower the 6. Now, so Aeolian, it's also called natural or pure minor. That's what a lot of classical musicians consider to be the main minor scale. It's got a more moody type of vibe. It's not used as much in straight ahead jazz, but in modern jazz, it's definitely used, gets that type of, more poppy minor type of sound. All right, so for our last couple scales here, we're going to get into sus chords. And by the way, just a quick note, for a regular sus chord, you can just use Mixolydian or Dorian. You can just use a regular dominant scale or a regular minor scale. It sounds totally fine. The 3rd isn't voiced in the chord, or the 3rd isn't voiced in the chord, but it still sounds totally good if you fill it in when you're improvising. It's fine. You can, your decision on whether you use Mixolydian or Dorian, you can kind of base that off of the general character of the piece. Is it more of a dominant sounding piece or more of a minor sounding piece? But sometimes the sus chord won't even act as the one, and in that case, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is you just get the sound in your ear, and you know the difference, the emotional difference that you're going to get from using the Mixolydian on it or the Dorian on it, and decide from there. Doesn't matter too much. Don't worry about it. But now getting into these variations on sus chords, we're going to start with a sus flat 9. That's going to sound like this. And what you can use for that is Phrygian. You'll see this in a lot of modern jazz. And then we're also going to have one more option there. If we make the 6 natural, then it ends up being called 13 flat 9 sus 4. It gets really fancy. And then the scale we're going to use is Dorian flat 2, another mode of melodic minor, the second mode of melodic minor. So that was just me blowing with that last one that we just did a little bit, that Dorian flat 2 sound. So again, remember, for improvising on this stuff, to get really flexible with it, the important thing is to learn different scale shapes. So again, we've made my 4 favorite scale exercises, and we've applied them to all 18 of those scales through all 12 keys. So that's really going to help you get flexible with all these different sounds, because these can be really fun to improvise on. But if you just learn the scale, just going up and down, it's not going to do much for you. You got to learn different shapes with it to really get flexible. So make sure to check out the link in the description below, and make sure to always keep an eye on my show dates, since I'm always touring around and would love to meet some of you guys in person. So thanks for checking this out, and have a great day, guys.